All right, so I guess Sean is gone. Hi, everyone. I guess today I'll be showing you some tips and tricks in Contour and code workbook using SQL. And in Contour, I'll be focusing mostly on examples on using window functions on notional data sets, as well as using parameters and how these can be useful when you build dashboards. And then I'll switch to code workbook and SQL, and also talk about the equivalents to the window functions and some data manipulations, and also playing with array columns in SQL within code workbook. Obviously, at any time, feel free to stop me. This is meant to be interactive, and even if the question is not exactly the topic that we're discussing. Does that sound good to everyone?
Sounds great.
Okay, I'll start with a contour analysis. And I'm saving these any resources in this N3C training area directory, which you can find in projects and files. You should all have access to this Enclave user groups folder, and basically every topic that we cover, we save the resources in here. If you don't, just let me know and I'll troubleshoot your access. So let me create a contour analysis here. And I'm going to start, well, let me call it something like EUG advanced contour example. And I'm going to start by importing some notional data. So I'll start with the visit occurrence data set. And I also want to import measurements, which is the lab tests. So they're in the data catalog, and Cynthia notional data visit occurrence. By the way, if you look at me, I'm turning my head to the left because I'm displaying my screen on a big screen, which is to my right. So sorry if it's confusing. Anyway, so let's take a look quickly at how the visit occurrence looks like. And so basically you have persons, and then each person has one or multiple visits, and then you have the dates for each visit and some more information about the visit type, such as whether it's outpatient or inpatient visit, etc. So in this call, I wanted to introduce a little bit how to use window functions in Contour. And for those of you who are not familiar with window functions, this is actually a term that is used in like regular SQL outside of the Enclave. So it's not something specific to the Enclave, but it's basically when you do a window function, you're doing a calculation across a set of rows in your table that are somehow related to the current row. So that's maybe one way to, and I'll show you examples and it will make more sense, but it's basically comparable to a type of calculation that you would do with an aggregate function. But the difference with an aggregate function is that when you use a window function, the result is not shrinked into a single output that corresponds to your group by aggregate, but you're storing the result for each row in your data set without shrinking it. So usually when you do aggregations in Contour, one way to do it is to use pivot tables. And so you can do something like, I'm just gonna do a pivot table by, let's say, person ID, and then basically the visits count. So if I do a count of visits occurrence ID, And then instead of a sum, I pick the unique count. When you do this, you're basically starting with a 3 million rows table. And now it's shrinking it into just one record per person ID. So this person had 84 visits, this person had 35, etc. And so if you want to use this pivot table, in fact, if you a pivot table, when you just load it, it's just a view. And so when you load the table board again, it just shows you the table that you had before. And so in order to use the results of a pivot table, you need to click on switch to pivoted data. And so when you do that now, the thing that you're working with is the result of your pivot table. So you only have 2 columns. But this is not what we want to do today. So we don't want to use pivot tables. I'm going to remove this. And let's say the first example I wanted to show is maybe a simple one. I want to have the same thing that I did on a pivot table without shrinking this data set. So for each row, meaning for each row here with a person ID, I want to have the number of visits that this person had, that this patient had. And so one way to do it is to define a new column using the expression board, which you can find here. So the expression board lets you write some simple function in the editor. The syntax is quite similar to SQL, but if you want the list of all the available functions, you can actually click on this view full documentation, and it gives you a catalog of all the operations that you can do in this expression board in here. So I'm going to define a new column, and let's call it number of patient visits. This is the first simple example. And so the way to do it, I'll write it down and then I'll explain how it works. So first I want the count of all the visits. So each visit is uniquely identified by the visit occurrence ID. And then if I do just this, it will just count all the visits across all the data sets. And so it will just sum up, it will give me basically 3 million row. It will define a new column that has the number 3 million. Let's actually try that real quick before modifying the query. So.
And so I just waiting when you're typing the tab in the dropdown, that just shows the table. Is that what it does?
Here?
Yeah.
Yeah, this is just a shortcut. So you have the list of all the available boards here. Mm-hmm. But then when you get used to Contour and you know the name of the board, you can start typing its name here. So when I do table, when I write table, it just gives me the boards I can apply. And you can do it from in between boards when you click on this plus button here. Okay. That's what it is. Sorry, it's something I started doing quickly, so I'm not realizing it's not obvious. So here it just gives me the number of rows. And so what I want is the number of visits per patient. And the way to do that is you add the keyword over. If you hit tab, it will just pre-fill and give you a number of things that you want to pre-fill. For now, I'm just going to delete these 2 rows, and I'll use another example using them after. So I'll explain what they do. But the key thing here is you want the key syntax is you have an aggregate function. So it could be count, max, min, average, whatever. And then it's over and this is where you define your window. This is why it's called the window function. And my window here, I want basically to compute the count for each patient. So the partition by column is going to be my person ID. So that's one of the simplest examples we can do in window function. And so when I execute it, you'll see that this person ID 28 had 52 visits. And then if I scroll down a little further, this person ID 65 had 9 visits, etc. So now let's do, let me do something a little more involved. I want to maybe, something I may wanna be interested in is the following. We have data partner IDs in this data set. So we can know, using a similar window function, the number of visits for this site, the total number of visits. And maybe something I want to do is calculate the like we have the number of visits for this specific patient. Maybe I want to be able to know, I'd be interested in knowing how much is that in percentage of the total number of visits for that particular site. So let's try to do something like that. So I'm going to add an expression board. And so let's call this column percentage of site visits. And so basically, the way you compute the percentage is I'm going to take this number of patient visits and I'm going to divide it by something I haven't defined yet, which is the number of total visits for that particular data partner ID or site. And so in order to do that, I'm going to do the same thing. So the count of visits occurrence ID. Oops. And it's going to be over, and let me delete these two rows for now, and we're this time partitioning by data partner ID. So let me just bring this here and explain and re-explain. So this value that we have here is basically the number of visits for each data partner ID. So we're taking the number of visits for this patient and dividing it by the number of sites visits, and this should give us a percentage. So let's calculate this row, and obviously the number of visits per sites could be very large. So let me actually format this in terms of percentages to be able to see it more clearly. So there's a function called format number, and so the way it works is the first argument is the number you want to format. And the second argument is the format. And so the way it works, if you look at the documentation and you type in format, whoops. Yeah, these are like some numerical functions and you can see how format number works. In fact, when you start typing, I'm just going to do it on a separate line for now. When you start typing format number, you can click in here and see what it's expecting. What is the format it's expecting? And so the way, if I want to do a percentage, it's like pounds, and then I want maybe 4 decimals, but I want it as a percentage. So let me delete this. And so as you can see now, we have this person represents, the number of visits for this person represents 0.02% of the total visits of the site. So these are things that you can do using window function. I'm going to add one more example in this visit occurrence, and then I wanted to switch and like do something slightly similar for measurements. And so maybe what let me see. So maybe this time what I want is a running number of visits. And what I mean by that is at every row, like at every row, you have a person ID and a visit date. And maybe for this particular person, it's it's their visit number 10 or something. So I want to be able to see, to say, looking at this record, this is the fifth visit for this patient from the beginning when we started recording visits for this patient. So I'm going to add another expression board. Let me add it at the bottom here. And let's call this run-in number of visits. And actually, before doing that, there is a visit type here or a visit concept name. Let's actually draw a quick histogram. I think they're only, because this is notional data, they're only like 3 or 4 different values. And I'll explain why. So visit concept name. And so I only have 3 visits, 3 type of visits: outpatient, inpatient, and emergency room visits. So maybe what I want to do here is per patient, I want the run-in number of visits up until that date, but I want it just for that particular visit type that we're looking at. So like run-in number of outpatient visits or run-in number of inpatient visits, etc. So this will add another layer of partitions. And so the way to do that, my aggregation is just a count because I want the number of visits. The visits are uniquely identified by a visit occurrence ID. And now I'm going to add my over statement, and I'm going to partition in by person ID. But also, like I mentioned, I also want to be able to partition by the visit type, which is here, visit concept name. So whether it's inpatient, so I don't want to be counting all the visits similarly. And so let's order this by visit start date. And this is important here because now we're doing a count up until from the very first visit date of that patient to the current date. So I want to order, before counting, I want to be able to order my records by visit date, by visit start date. Visit start date. And so what this is saying here is the rows between unbounded, preceding, and current row. And when I use the measurement table, I'll show another example of using this statement. But what this basically means is do this count broken down by these 2 categories and do it from the, like, this basically gives you the ability to specify a window in terms of time. So here I'm just saying, count everything between the beginning and the current row that I'm looking at. Or you can do something like the last 5 visits. So count everything between 10 preceding and the current row. So let's execute this. And let's see how the results look like. I think maybe in order to, let's see first, let's wait for it to load. And let's maybe pick just one patient because this might be a little messy to understand. So I'm just going to pick one patient that has the 3 type of visits, just to make sure that our window expression is working well. So I'm going to, I'm going to pick person ID and unique count of the visit types, so visit concept name. I just wanted to basically pick one patient that has the 3 type of visits, and then we'll be able to visualize that here. So this patient, for example, has all the 3 type of visits. I'm going to filter to this patient, and let me actually just show the columns I'm interested in. just so it's easier to visualize the results. Let's do something like going to clear the column. I just want to see person ID. I want to see the visit start date. The visit concept name. And the metric that I just calculated, which is the run-in number of visits. So now that, as you can see here, and these are dummy dates because this is notional data. So, but you can see that this patient has one visit, which is emergency room, and then like 10 outpatient visits, actually much more than that. It keeps running 54 outpatient visits and then one inpatient visit. So I'm not sure if this is the best example, but you can see here that at every record you're looking at, we're saying here that this is the 4th visit that is an outpatient visit for this patient. So yeah, that's what I wanted to show on visit occurrence. I'm going to import.
Just a quick question before.
Yeah.
And I think just when you were, I think I did it quickly, when you were looking at histogram, trying to find this patient, here, are you, I think one, are you, is there any partition were you doing any partitions with the count? So they're all 3, right? So
oh yeah. So what I'm showing here is for each person's ID,
right.
I'm showing the unique count of visit
contact name. I see. Okay.
Yeah, I just want to be able to say for each patient, how many different visit types did they have? Did they have outpatient and inpatient and emergency room or only emergency room, etc. So I just wanted, and I did that to pick a relevant example so that I can show you that this like row count it changes whenever the visit type changes. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Cool. Any other questions? I just wanted to, yeah, go ahead.
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear.
So I was just, if you look at your list of what you just showed us, the list of visits for that patient who had 54 outpatient visits or something.
Yeah.
When you're, well, my question is really, are those, I can't even tell, are those visits sorted in ascending visit start date? Because that's what you probably want. But
yes, they should be, they're all sorted, as you can see here. And the reason I made sure that they're sorted by using this order by statement here. So I'm ordering by visit start date in an ascending order.
Got it. Okay, thank you.
Sure. Any other questions?
Saad, I'm doing this with a different function, row number over partition order by.
Okay.
Is this better to do this way, you think, or better to do that way? I think row number is a little bit more intuitive. You know, again, basically trying to build a running number of visits.
Yeah.
Can you show again actually where did you get the running number of visits from? Right there. Okay, so count visit occurrence.
Yeah, you can do a row number. It might be actually better to do it in terms of row number. Sometimes you don't have a primary key like this, like the visit occurrence ID. And so row number would be better for that.
So count visit occurrence ID here doesn't give the final count, but it gives the count, it gives the counter, right? The index in a way.
No, so it's counting all the visits. So for each row, all the visits for this person and this visit type, from the beginning up until the current row.
Okay.
which
Okay.
is what this row between unbounded preceding and current row does. And obviously the sorting is we're sorting the data set by visit start date so that the count is done properly, so that we don't count some dates that are after the current row.
So in expression board, is there a way to comment out code? I forgot.
Yes,
If you put
if I'm not mistaken, it's like comments. Yeah, just dash dash. I think
Okay.
you can also do, I forget if that worked. This is another log comments. Whoops, let's see if that works. Okay, that doesn't really work. I thought this was one way to do a block comment, but no, it just, sorry, it's just a dash, well, a dash star. So that's another way to comment the code.
All right. Can you do it with the row visit? Maybe you comment all of this and do it with row number.
Yeah, like add a comment, sure.
No. I was saying, can you comment the way that you did it here and do it with row number over partition instead of count?
Sure. Let's do it in a separate expression board just to have the cool example. I'm just gonna name it something different.
Okay.
Let's just call it 2. And we're gonna do row number over, and then we're going to partition by person ID and visit concept name, and then ordering by visit start date, and I think that should be it. That should give the same results, I believe.
Okay.
So let's just, we can double check on a table here. Any other questions so far? You just download the other table while it's loading to save some time. Because I do want to get you a little bit into code workbook and SQL. So let me import the measurement table. And so as you can see here, like they're the same, it switched quickly, but you can see that they're the same results. In fact, you can do a real quick comparison. Let's just call it diff, and we're gonna do running number of visits minus running number of visits 2, just to make sure it should always be 0. And then let's look at it on a histogram. Oops. Yeah, so as you can see, they're all zeros. So it's a similar way to do the same thing. You were right, Cornelia. Okay, so measurement, just another example. Let me check the chat real quick. Can you explain, please, row between? Okay, I think, yeah, that was your question, Cornelia, right? Do you understand now what it means? That statement, row between unbounded preceding.
I wasn't sure what that unbounded means, but that unbounded means that you go all the way to the beginning of the table.
Exactly, and I think which brings me to this example now where I want to show it slightly differently. I want to be able here with this measurement table. Suppose the labs are all the same type of lab measurements. I want to be able to compute like a rolling average of the value of that lab measurement, if that value is a number, but for the last 5 measurements for each patient. So let's do something like that. I'm just gonna real quick, because I see the value is, there's a column called value as number. Where is it? There you go. I want to first remove the nulls. So let's just apply a filter here. And value as number, let's make it remove all the nulls. Let's just see how many rows we have. Okay, so we got rid of maybe about 1 million rows. And now let me actually add a comment of what I want to do. In fact, let's look at the distribution of these values, these lab values. Yeah, so I guess quite a wide range, but I don't see any nulls anymore. Let's say what I want to calculate here. This is markdown, so you can write comments here. Let's say I want to calculate the rolling average of lab tests over the last 5. Not sure if that's the best way to say it, but basically the average of the last 5 tests per person, per patient. We're gonna do that with an expression board. So we're gonna define a new column and let's call it average last 5 tests value per person, but it should be assumed. So this time our aggregate is a mean. So we're gonna take the mean of this lab test value, which is called value as number. And then we're going to do that. We're going to partition by person ID. So for each person. And we're going to order by the date, measurement date. And we want not everything up until the current row, but just the last 5. So the last 5 tests per person. So this is why row preceding 5, row between 5 preceding and current row means here. So let's apply that.
Is there anything that you can substitute for current row?
I think so. You can go after the current row. So again, here you get the documentation from here. And I think if you do go to window functions, and I thought you could do that, but I'll have to double check. I may be wrong. So if you do something like N10, yeah, that doesn't work. Yeah, let me get back to you on that. I thought we could do it, but maybe not. But in any case, so I just computed my average last 5 tests. Let's actually plot it as a time series plot. And this will be a good transition to showing you how to add parameters and dashboard them. So in my y-axis, I want to show the measurement date. And then I want to show basically this value that I just computed, the average last 5 tests. And I'm averaging it again because I'm showing it now for everyone, not just for each person. So like the total average. But then what I can do is I can add a filter and look at it for each person and maybe also for each measure, for each lab value. So let's actually create, before doing the filter, I'm going to create 2 parameters. And so you click on this parameter section here on the left-hand side. The first parameter is just patient. And so I think here the person ID is an integer. So it's going to be a number, and I can allow multiple values, and I can suggest persons from this column. So like when I click on the drop down, I'll have some suggestions. So this is one parameter that I called patient. And the second parameter I want to create is basically the type of lab tests, which is measurement concept name. So I'm going to create another parameter. Let's just call it lab test type. And this is a string. I can allow multiple values, and they could be suggested from the measurement concept name. So let's do that. Now that I've created the parameters, and let me actually make this a default parameter if I don't specify anyone. So on the default, I want this value, the cholesterol in LDL, whatever. And let's save this. And now that I did this, I'm going to add a filter board. And I'm going to apply filters based on these parameters. So not static values, but based on whatever parameters I provide here. And then I'll show you why. So I want patient ID to be equal to this patient parameter. Right now, the default is nothing, so it will not apply any filter. And I want the measurement concept name to be equal to this lab test type parameter, which by default would be this guy unless I change it. So if I save, I should have now a different graph which corresponds to this parameter. And now what I can do, I have a lot of transformations in this contour. If I want to show this to my colleague or other people, I don't need to show all the steps. Maybe I just want to show the results and have them parameterized. So one way to do that is to click Add to Dashboard. And let's call this time series of specified lab tests for specified person. And the dashboard name, let's just call it EUG test. So now that I added this, you can see this new button here called dashboard. If I switch to it, you'll have a dashboard view with only this graph, and I can play with the parameters, right? So I can choose a different lab test and hit apply and look at the time series for the specific lab test. I can also add a person ID here and have it load. The interesting bit here is I can also add text, but parameterize the text. So let's see, I do something like selected lab test is, and if I hit percentage, I can get the value of this parameter. So let's actually, well, maybe there's nothing for this guy. Let's maybe choose a different one. We can actually switch to view mode, and you have a nicer view where the only thing you do is you play with these parameters and then you have your graphs update. This is the time series for this selected lab tests. Not sure if there's relevant data or if it's all zero, so I'll have to find that. If I apply here the default. Let's see what it shows. Does that make sense overall? The use of parameters and dashboards?
What doesn't make sense to me is, don't you need to give it a particular patient ID, or does it just use all, I'm not clear on what patient ID is doing in this dashboard.
Yeah, so let's go back to here. This patient ID parameter, let me switch back to edit mode. By default, it doesn't have any default value. So what that means is that no filter will be applied. Like it will give me all the persons. But if I, let's just select a specific person ID from here. Oh, that's visit occurrence. Let me select this person ID. Oops. If I switch to the dashboard, so what I mean by that, Hannah, is that it's optional. If I specify the person ID, then yes, it will filter to this patient. If I specify nothing, then the filter will not be applied, and I will just look at the values for all the patients. Maybe this person is not, has only one data point, actually, as you can see here. So like the time series are not relevant.
Okay, thanks.
Cool. Any other questions about this?
So Sad, if we filter to one person,
Yeah.
Because the Y is the mean of average last 5 tests.
Yeah.
So that means for this person,
Yeah.
you calculate the several average and then calculate the mean.
That's a good question. So for this person, maybe this person didn't have this last test, this lab test, but for this person, what I'm supposed to show here is that number, average last 5 tests, meaning the last 5 tests for that person for that particular. So let me actually remove this. And so the reason, let me go back here and explain.
Because it seems like it's a mean of the average, right?
Yes, but the reason I'm doing that, this average is per person, this column. So if I'm showing only for one person, it's the mean of one data point, meaning it's that only for that person, we're showing the average last 5 tests.
Oh, I see.
But because I'm aggregating across potentially many persons, I'm doing an additional average of all the rolling averages of these persons.
Okay, gotcha. Thanks.
So I think now, yeah, Any other questions?
So the dashboard, you can only see it when you create it somehow, is right? It doesn't show up before.
Whenever you have a board and you click on Add to Dashboard, you will create a dashboard and you can add things to it. It's think of it as if you've used reports, it's similar to reports, but it's like it's having additional features. So like this text that is parameterized is one additional feature. But yeah, it will only show up when you start adding your contour boards to the dashboard.
And the parameters are also shared between all the different, like you can use it with any of the whatever you call like the function or like
yes.
transformation, right?
Yeah. I can use the parameter here. It's like shared between all the paths within the same contour analysis, but on different contour analysis, obviously they won't be applied. But if I want to apply the parameter here, I can. I have patience here.
Yeah.
Which is on a different tab. So yeah. Cool. And you can actually use the parameter in an expression board. So like if the parameter is maybe a number value, you can add it, use it in an expression board. So like real column name plus parameter or something like that. Cool. I'll try to go quicker because I only have 10 minutes and I'll show some similar examples in SQL. Feel free to stop me if you have questions, and if we don't get to see everything, we can follow up with this next week or whenever Sean puts us on the agenda. But in SQL, maybe I want to show a similar way to use window functions with potentially some date manipulations. So let me import, let me see, maybe let me import the person table. And let me create a SQL transformation. And so if you look at person table, something I'm interested in doing is, we have a person ID, we have a birth date time. So I'm able to compute an age column if I want to. But just to showcase a window function, maybe I want to calculate the average age of per ethnicity and do a difference. So for each person, I want to be able to say, here is the difference between the age of that person and the average ethnicity age, the corresponding ethnicity age. So I'll do that in a couple steps. I think first, let me pick, so I want to select person ID and I want to compute the age. So I want to select the birthday time. In order to compute the age, I need the current date. So today's date, and that's done by a function called current date. And I can rename the column. And I need the, it's called ethnicity source value, I believe, right? Yeah, ethnicity source value. So first, let's run this real quick. And so now I have a person ID. I'm just picking the columns I need, date, time, and current dates, and the ethnicity. And what I want is to calculate the age. So let me do it in addition to this. So I want to select all the columns. So right now, as you can see, I have my person ID, birth date, current date, and ethnicity. I want to select all the columns, but define a new column, which is the difference between current date and the birth date time. So that's done with the function datediff. So it's going to be datediff of current date and birth date time. And this will give me the number of days. So if I want the number of years, I'm going to divide by, let's just do, I'm sure there is a better function to convert days into years. I'm just going to divide by 365.25. And this will probably give me a double value with decimals. So I want to cast it to an integer. So I'm going to do cast of this value as an int. And I'm going to name this column age. So let's do this for now. And then in a following transform, I'll use a window function to compute the average age for the average ethnicity group age. And then I can do the difference. Does this make sense so far? I hope I'm not going too fast or too, whoops. Oh yeah, I need a from statement. So I'm selecting these from the result of this query. Let's just call this data and maybe save it as a data set so that when I run transforms after, hopefully it's faster. Any questions so far while this is running?
The date diff function, if you pass a year, you automatically calculate as.
Oh, yes. That's a good point. Is it like as a third argument you pass in year?
It's a second, the first argument, I think. It's
Oh,
an interval.
Like this?
Mhm.
Okay, well, that's even better than casting. Thanks for that. Yeah, I couldn't recall how to do it, but yeah, that's a good point. As a follow-up to this, I'll send you a link to all the lists of Spark SQL functions. So this is a version of SQL, which is Spark SQL, which is almost the same as PostgreSQL, but with some minor syntax differences and some additional functions that I think you can use here with the Spark library. So in anyways, now we have a person ID, an age, and an ethnicity value. So I can do my window function. And so the way to do that is let's select the person ID. Let's select their age. And then I want the mean of age over the ethnicity group value. So the way it works is you do over and then you add partition by ethnicity source value. So now I have for each person the age and the group age. Let's just call this as ethnicity average age. And then I'll be able to do something like age minus ethnicity average age as age diff. So let's try this, or maybe I can do this as a following transform, just to do it in different steps. But age, let's just call this age calcs. And yeah, we're almost there. We still have 3 minutes on this meeting, but hopefully this will finish and I can show one last thing, but feel free to stop me if you have questions or just things that you were hoping to have that I've covered in this session, but I didn't have time, and I can follow up and do it on a separate session. So right now, as you can see, we have for each person the age per ethnicity. In fact, I should also show the ethnicity source value and save this as data set. The other thing I was hoping to show, maybe I can show that real quick, is you can define array columns in Spark SQL. Probably I have a silly syntax error here. Oh yeah, that should have been before. About that. Let me import maybe the visit occurrence table, and I want to show a last example if time allows. Visit occurrence. Interesting. This didn't work. Oh, I think I need to rename. Yeah, I should give this a name. As so while this is running, the thing I wanted to show is, suppose you want to have for each person ID in one column, the list of all their visit dates. And so the way to do that is using some array functions. And they're multiple, and you can look at them in the, I'll send you the documentation, but just to show you where to find it, there's a, in the code repository, there is a SQL reference guide with all the syntax, and it's called Spark SQL reference. And so you can look at things like collection functions, aggregate functions, wheel functions with the specific syntax for each one of them. So I can send you this as a follow-up, but to do this quickly here, let's do select person ID. And I want all the visit start dates for that person. So the group by is going to be by person ID. And for each person ID, I want all the visit start dates. So there's one function that groups all the dates into one array or list. It's called collect list. And we can call it visit start. And so it's collect list of visit start dates. And let's just call this list of visit dates. So what this will do, and you'll see it soon, is it will show basically a new column, which is of an array type containing all the visits. I'm just switching back here to show you that this worked, hopefully as expected. So if I open the data set, I just want to see the different values. So let's see how many different, we should technically have as many values as the ethnicities. And I'm sorry, give me 1 second, I'm being kicked out of the room. But yeah, since we're actually running out of time, I can maybe send you an examples of this and follow up later on. Do you guys have any questions? All right, well, thank you for joining.
Thank you.
Sorry for ending it quickly. Just people are getting impatient, but thanks for joining, and see you guys next week.